Welcome, everyone. I apologize for the delay. We were having some technical issues, but welcome. I am Hannah Shea with World Law Group. For those of you who may not know me, you've joined us today for a 30-minute briefing on the EU AI Act. Yesterday did kick off WLG Beyond Borders for us, which is a 4-week virtual program for young lawyers. We've invited them all to join all of our practice group sessions that are taking place during their program. So we have a number of them with us today. A few quick housekeeping items. You have been muted upon arrival, and please remain so until we open it up for questions. We do only have 30 minutes for the update, and it's going to go by really fast. You're welcome to drop any questions you have into the chat, or at the end when we open it up for questions, you can use the raise hand feature. We would love to know where you're from. So if you haven't done already, please take a quick moment to rename yourself to include your firm. You can do that by hovering over your video and selecting the 3 dots and rename, or finding your name in the participant list, selecting more and rename. And now I'll introduce our speakers today. We have Emily Postfeldt and Fredrik Roos of Sederwalls in Sweden, and they will give us a quick overview of the EU AI Act. And then we'll hear from Matt Hervey of Gowling WLG in England on generative AI and IP considerations. So with that, Emily and Fredrik, take it away.
Thank you, Hannah. So hi all, nice to be here today to talk to you about this very interesting topic of artificial intelligence. And we will try to give you a very high level briefing, because we could talk for hours about this topic, and with Matt on board today, probably for days. So we're experiencing, as all of you know, a really big AI boom in society and business and law today. AI is nothing new. It goes back at least all the way to the 1950s, and over that period of time, we've had a couple of these peaks that we're experiencing now, when everybody thought that AI is really going to kick off, or rather we have had in between that, we have had what is called in history AI winters, where very little activity and very little investment is made. Now we're in the latest boom, which in my mind started primarily like in 2015, when there was a breakthrough showing when the now Google subsidiary DeepMind made an AI which was able to beat the professional Go player in a complex game, which required some more advanced AI features compared to what we've seen in the past. But we're not going to go into that more deeper, but we're having this boom now. And as a response to that, and perhaps also from a trade political angle, the largest players in this industry are obviously US companies primarily. So from the European standpoint, similar to other areas such as GDPR and data, we're seeing a lot of legislative initiatives. And then we have the upcoming EU AI Act. And today we're going to try to give you a brief overview of its range of applicability and key functions, a timeline of where we are today. And then we're going to also look into the current hot topics of generative AI, where Matt will give some interesting perspectives. So with that said, over to you, Emily.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm doing a little bit of the nitty-gritty details from a very high level perspective then. So the first part is, okay, where are we now in the legislative process? As you perhaps have already heard, so the first legislative proposal actually came from the Commission on the 21st of April in 2021, so more than 2 years ago. However, last Wednesday, the European Parliament actually voted or adopted their negotiation position for the AI Act. So now the next steps will be to actually negotiate that together with the Council and the Commission to decide on the final shape of the law. And as you can understand, as long as when all these EU state members therefore will have to decide on the final draft, this is going to take some time, but it's also going to introduce a few changes. So the draft that we have now is not going to probably be the final draft. We can expect changes to the final draft then. And the aim is therefore to reach an agreement by the end of this year. So that is basically the timeline for now. And this is also changing all the time, but this is the main timeline for now. Another good thing to understand is that, so the EU AI Act is actually inspired by the NLF, meaning the new legislative framework for safe products. And you can see a lot of traces from that in the Act, where you can see that the Act draws heavily on the model, for example, for certification of safe products, especially in regards to creating safe and secure consumer products, and strong leanings in the Act towards governance by private self-regulations from private actors, so from companies and so on. And also it's good to understand that this is not supposed to be an act where you can, read it on its own. It's supposed to act in context with other major legislative packages by the EU, for example, the DSA, the DMA, DGA, and also GDPR. And so it's good to have a good understanding of all of these packages to actually understand the whole act in itself. So it's not going to be an easy read for everyone to understand. But yeah, so over to you, Fredrik, again.
Yeah, just some very quick notes of on the scope of applicability, and there are two aspects to that, and I think the quick summary is that the scope of applicability is very broad. So on the territorial side of the scope, the legislation is somewhat similar to what we have in the GDPR, meaning that it will not be sufficient to, for example, only offshore your servers and provide a service from an offshore location into Europe. So the AI Act will have a broader reach than that. It will be applicable. And then, as you will see, and Emily will tell you a little bit more about later, there's also multiple different roles of players in that are targeted by the EU Act. So the Act can be applicable to you as a provider of an AI system, as a developer of it. It can also be applicable to you as if you're importing an AI system into Europe. So the idea is that someone will always be responsible for the AI. And on the next slide, just another, I think that's another key concept, because we worked with AI also prior to seeing this draft of the Act. And I would just say that the definition of artificial intelligence in the AI Act is also a very broad definition. So traditionally, like if I described this a couple of years ago, I would probably say that AI has to be something like that DeepMind's Go engine. So like a quite advanced computer systems with complicated algorithms and so on, in order to make it a true artificial intelligence. But in the AI Act, the bar for being an artificial intelligence system is very low. It can be also quite simple programs and processes. So applicability is scope of applicability is very broad.
And yeah, so how it's supposed to work a little bit is that the Act is supposed to take a risk-based approach. And what that means is that the AI Act is supposed to differentiate between users of AI system by applying 4 levels of risks. And then the AI systems are supposed to be classified into 3 categories. So basically unacceptable risk, high risk, or limited and minimal risk AI systems. And unacceptable risks is, the stuff of our nightmares in regards to AI systems, what we can see some dictators everywhere using. We can see that it's subliminal, manipulative, exploitative techniques causing harm to people or environments, real-time remote biometric identification systems, but also post remote biometric identification systems, and all forms of social scoring, but also in order to be able to, not only facial recognition, but also emotional recognitions and so on. And then we have the high-risk AI systems, which are systems, for example, that evaluate consumer creditworthiness, recruiting or employee management systems, systems utilizing biometric identifications in non-public spaces. And then we have safety critical systems, for example, systems that would put health of citizens at risk due to failure. And any system used in the administration of justice. And here is also quite interesting because the European Parliament actually added last Wednesday as well that high-risk systems are also AI systems to influence, for example, voters in political campaigns, but also recommender systems used by social media platforms, which are platforms with more than 45 million users under the Digital Service Act. So again, you need to understand the DSA to be able to understand the classification system, for example, in the EU AI Act. So you have to read all the acts together in order to be able to understand. And then you have the limited and minimal risk AI systems, which are, TAI and, all the other chatbots and so that we've seen. We have AI-enabled video and computer games, spam filters, inventory management systems, and so on. And basically, the consequence of you having classified an AI system into one of these three buckets, basically on those 4 risks, the AI Act then tells you what you need to do. So the first one is basically don't use it. It's prohibited. You're not allowed to have it. It's completely banned. So if you come into the bucket of unacceptable risk, you're not allowed to use it in the EU or provide it to the EU. If it comes into the high risk bucket, that's where the majority of the requirements actually is. So you have human oversight requirements, you have transparency requirements, cybersecurity, risk management, data quality, monitoring and reporting obligations, and so on and so on and so on. And then you have the minimum and limited risks, which is basically the transparency and code of conduct requirements. And transparency requirements is basically that you need for users to understand that they are using an AI and how they're using the AI, but also perhaps content. And so in case of generative AI, so Matt is going to talk a little bit more about that and the transparency requirements in regards to that. But as Frederick also said, it depends a little, these kind of requirements also falls differently depending on what kind of role you have in accordance with the EU AI Act. So for example, if you're a provider of the system, a developer or something like that, you need to be able to ensure overall compliance of all these requirements for high risk AI systems. And if you are an importer or distributor, then you have to ensure that the high-risk AI system has been brought into conformity by the provider before you make it available on the market. So here we will probably see a lot of agreements between, the importers and distributor and the providers to, ensure these contractual obligations instead of the legal obligations. And then we have the users, which are the users of these systems. And this is not the end users. This is important to stress. This is not you and me as people. It's not data subjects as we talk about it in the GDPR. This is as a professional user. So that means companies that are using these AI systems in a professional capacity. And they need to be able to use these high risk AI systems in according to their company's instructions of use and so on. But as soon as you change the purpose of the AI system, so again, a little bit similar to the GDPR, if you know that. So as soon as you change the purpose of the AI systems, then you are actually then considered to be a provider, and you will have to be responsible for all of these requirements. And so the last slide from Frederick and I. So again, what will happen if it goes wrong, meaning you are being non-compliant with the requirements in the AI Act, it could result in fines up to 30 million euros or 6% of the company's worldwide annual turnover. So heftier than those incurred by violations of the GDPR. And it is, of course, the use of prohibited systems and the violation of the data governance provisions when using high-risk systems that will incur the largest potential fines. And all other violations are subject to the lower maximum, which is, the 20 million and 4%, which is, the highest in the GDPR. But they have also introduced a fun little small fine of 10 million euros, or 2% of worldwide annual turnover, if a company provides incorrect or misleading information to the authorities. So that was actually quite a new and funny one. So that's from us. So Matt, feel free to take over.
Okay, I think you need to stop sharing, and then I'm allowed to. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the new rules for generative AI and foundation models, which were rather quickly added to the whole procedures in the last round in May, and have now been voted through for the negotiation position as of the 14th. So just to introduce myself briefly, I'm a partner in the IP team at Gowling. I'm also head of our AI law group, and generally that's been advising on IP strategy and IP parts of transactions involving AI, and then coordinating advice from other practice areas. But what's happened recently to me, and it may be happening to you as well, is a sudden increase from a wide range of clients in generative AI, which is raising issues of IP, privacy, and compliance. So what I'm going to do is talk about technology and then show you what changes were made to the AI Act. And to illustrate the issues, I'm also general editor of the UK textbook on the subject, and I write the IP chapter with 2 other authors. And the first edition was 50,000 words on IP. We're still editing it. It's already up to 70,000 words, and that's really because of generative AI and all the IP issues it raises. So to talk briefly about technology, for the last 10 years, the game in town has been what is now known as discriminative AI in contrast to generative AI. And that's the focus on using training data and other techniques to allow a machine to recognize patterns so that it can classify data. So it can take a sound wave and figure out what words you were saying to Alexa, or it can take a video stream and figure out if what it's seeing is a pedestrian or a cyclist or a vehicle. And by cracking, as it were, processing of language and vision, that opened up applications across all industries, from medical diagnosis to self-driving cars. But what we've seen in the last few years, and especially in the public perception in the last 6 months, is a sudden leap forward in generative AI. And that is AI where you give it a category and it will synthesize new data to fit that category. And here are 3 high-profile examples, each of which was mistaken by people to be the work of humans. The first 2 won awards, and the third was unwittingly used for a book cover. But as well as images, it can produce text and computer code, video, 3D models, and the like. But the issues generative AI raises is copyright infringement in the training materials and in the outputs, whether these can also be protected by IP, the fact that they may output unlawful content, privacy concerns with the information that went into training, and indeed environmental concerns, the amount of energy required to train such models. So looking at infringement, these are all images taken from a research paper which showed that images from the training data on the top row were largely reproduced verbatim in answer to prompts when the machine was outputting images. Now, they were rare, but significant examples. So looking at the issues here, generative AI, unlike a lot of traditional AI, can be trained on unstructured data. You can pour data in and it can handle it. And that is part of a reason why it is now very common for generative AI to be trained on essentially the entire internet. So ChatGPT and other systems have been trained on the entire common crawl of the internet. And whether that's allowed is a very unharmonized issue as between jurisdictions. We have very wide differences in what is fair use or fair dealing, and whether there are specific exceptions for text and data mining, style, pastiche, and temporary copies. This also raises technical questions. So if I download images from the internet, I think I'm copying. If I extract data, does that process require copying? Is the trained model itself a copy of the training data, and are the outputs copies? And are these copies for the purposes of copyright law? And this all goes to the issue of jurisdiction shopping. So if I train in a country where there is a text and data mining exception, can I then move the model itself or the outputs across jurisdictions without making further copies? There is ongoing litigation in this space, particularly between Getty and Stability AI, and a class action by some artists on the same topic. And what the AI Act proposes to do about all of this is to require disclosure of the works used in training, and to require safeguards against the production of unlawful content, and that you must protect fundamental rights. And fundamental rights are defined in recitals or explained in recitals as including IP. The other issue is generative AI, or some of it, is actually very good at outputting deep fakes and generating fake news, and that is a threat to democracy. Now, in terms of IP law generally, there are also very unharmonized approaches to any rights in one's likeness and voice. And in the UK, there's almost no protection at all, except in a narrow form of passing off. But by contrast, in the US, there are states which expressly provide for personality rights. And in parts of Europe, you have maybe constitutional rights in your likeness and voice, or you may be able to bring an action in unfair competition. But this is obviously a social issue about where the borderline should be between, let's say, satire and the rights and personality. Now, what the AI Act proposes is that you need to mitigate the risks of the impact on democracy and on the rule of law and the like, and also that you adhere to the general rules on transparency so that people know when they're dealing with an AI. And then privacy risks. You may have noticed that ChatGPT was temporarily banned in Italy over concerns with privacy. And even though the ban has been lifted, I believe the investigation continues, and I have heard that there is an investigation in France as well. And the concerns are, if you train a generative AI on essentially the entire internet, you are processing personal data, and you may not be able to retrain the model in order to adhere to rights of erasure or rectification. And again, what the AI Act proposes to do about this is to create obligations over data governance, which would require, for example, respect for privacy. The other key concept is foundation models. Now, some, but not all generative AI is based on a foundation model, but these are generally understood to be AI trained on a huge amount of data and able to undertake a range of disparate tasks. So this is an image by NVIDIA, and it shows a range of data, text and images and the like, but a single AI that's capable of doing many different things, from answering questions to sentiment analysis and the like. Now, the legal issues are the same as with generative AI, but there's even more uncertainty about how downstream use of a foundation model will evolve because it's capable of doing more than one thing. So turning to the Act, I won't take you through every detail here because of the time, but we have the definition of foundation model, which I think is correct. It's the broad scope of the data and the range of tasks it can undertake. We have generative AI, which is AI that can generate content such as complex text and images. I think that's all fine. The only thing I find odd is the definition of AI expressly requires that it influences physical or virtual environments. And I don't know what that means. And I don't know if that excludes some generative AI and what the logic would be. Now, for foundation models, there's the new Article 28B, and this applies to providers. As Emily said, this applies before you actually market it or put it into service, What's very interesting to some of my clients is that this includes your own internal use of generative AI, because we have a lot of clients training large language models to do things in-house. And it's unclear if that's supposed to be covered, because it only covers use under your own name or trademark. And it's unclear to me whether that includes internal use. But generally speaking, the obligations are to, this is remarkable though, mitigate reasonably foreseeable risk to health, fine, safety, yes, fundamental rights, which is pretty broad, includes IP, the environment, democracy, and the rule of law. So that's quite a risk assessment one has to make. Then we have the use of data sets subject to appropriate data governance. So that's things like privacy. We need appropriate levels of performance and predictability, interpretability, and the like. We have environmental requirements, quality management. You have to register the foundation model in the national databases, and you need to keep the documentation on all of this for 10 years. And then this is my final slide, and I'm aware of the time. For generative AI in particular, it only applies to foundation models used for generative AI. So not generative AI that doesn't involve a foundation model. And the key issues here are, one, transparency. People need to know they're dealing with an AI if it's a chatbot or the like. You need to have safeguards against the generation of content in breach of union law. So does that mean you need to prevent it infringing trademarks? Does it mean you need to avoid racist or discriminatory language and the like? And then finally, and most controversially, I think, is you need to make publicly available a list of the copyright works used in training. And we've already seen litigation on this basis, and I suspect our clients will face litigation to the extent they are training their own generative AI for use in the EU. So sorry about the time, we started a little late, but that's a whirlwind tour of generative AI and the EU Act.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Frederick and Emily. I know that we are right at the 30-minute mark for this, and we are trying to keep it to 30 minutes. But if anyone does have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. And alternatively, I welcome you to send me an email, and I'm happy to get it to our panelists today. They would be happy to follow up with you in response to anything. And I did just want to point out quickly, we did ask the Beyond Borders, the Young Lawyers participants, to add BB in front of their name. So in the participant list, those are all of the BBs that you're seeing there. There are Beyond Borders participants. So it's nice to see so many of our young lawyers coming to learn from you guys today. Any other final thoughts? Emily, Frederick, Matt?
The only thing I'd add, we haven't discussed the Liability Act, I think, and that underpins the ability to bring claims in the EU. It requires entities to have sufficient funds here to compensate people and to make disclosure of what actually happened. It's the sort of thing we're used to, I would say, in Anglo-Saxon tort law. But I think it may be that some member states, that helps reverse the burden of proof and the like for bringing such actions.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We will have this recording available on our website probably early next week. We try to do them at the end of the week and then post them for the following week. So if you have any colleagues that were interested in attending and were not able to fit it into their schedule, or it's something that you want to reference back, we will have that posted online. And I look forward to seeing a lot of the young lawyers over the next couple of weeks at our practice and industry group sessions, along with their regular programming. Thank you, everyone.